Welcome to For the Love of Books, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries. Hi everyone, welcome back to the North Lanarkshire Libraries podcast For the Love of Books. My name is Chris Wilson, the E-Services Librarian, and happy Book Week Scotland to everyone. It is almost the end of the week now, but there has been some fantastic events in the libraries, and we do have a few more to go before the end of the week. And because it has been Book Week Scotland, I decided to get in touch with Allison Galbraith, the storyteller and author of Lanarkshire Folk Tales, because the theme for Book Week Scotland this year is Scotland's stories. And she has got some fantastic local folk tales in that book, and it was a great opportunity to speak to her, hear a little bit more about some of the tales in there, how she got the book put together, and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that, do listen on and find out from Alison herself. Hi Alison, welcome to our podcast and for coming along to speak to us during Book Week Scotland. It's a great honour to have you on the podcast, so thank you for coming along.
My pleasure, thank you for inviting me.
No, you're very welcome. And I think people probably best know you for storytelling and of like traditional tales and folk tales and things like that. What got you interested in that to start off with? What made you kind of get started with doing that kind of thing?
Folk tales and storytelling go right back probably to my very first job. When I left school, I was a community librarian for a year.
Right.
And so I loved books and community librarian, nice wee job. It was only for a year, but I seem to remember travellers' children would leave school at lunchtime and come into my community library on the way to their houses, and I used to read stories to them. I'd let them choose a book and do what any good librarian does, encourage them to get into stories and books. And I loved reading out stories. So I did have a theatrical mother who was a good actress. She ran the Amdrams, so I did get coached in acting and reading from a very early age. So I think it was probably way back in the blood, the family blood.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I haven't done. I've been kind of working as a librarian for a long time now, but I've been kind of working in a bit of an online setting most of the time. But I did enjoy doing a lot of the kind of storytelling type things whenever you have like school visits and stuff like that into the classes and into the libraries and stuff. So I do kind of get why it's kind of quite a fun thing to do and enjoy whenever you're getting into it and things like that. So I can kind of I fully appreciate that that's where maybe kind of started from and interest came from. So and having a kind of family member who's kind of bred that into you a little bit as well, obviously kind of probably quite a big influence on you, I would imagine.
Yeah, and if you think back that far to where do you first hear stories, mum and dad would tell me bedtime stories, and my
Yeah.
father, he told one that was a story told to him by his mother and his granny. So it was a family tale, and I think that was my favorite. I loved a lot of the picture books, but the one dad told without a book, that one stayed with me. I use that story when I'm storytelling, and my dad, he was with the Merchant Navy. My family were from Greenock, and Dad, he was an officer in the boiler room. So Dad told us stories from his travels around the sea. So yes, but I mean, it's not. Yeah, I'm not anything special, Chris. Everybody is a storyteller. Everybody's families have got the wee stories from their grannies and their grandpas. So, it's in the blood. Maybe it's a Scottish thing.
Yeah, I think like you say, I think more, at least though in all families there's always usually at least one person who likes to kind of give a good story. I know in my family, my dad's definitely the storyteller. I think in our families, he always kind of looks for new people to tell the stories to that everyone's heard a million times that he's revealed. So yeah, I think there is kind of maybe it is a Scottish thing, like you say, it could be kind of part of the kind of family tradition to have like someone who retells the stories from the past history of families and stuff. The one of the reasons why we've got you on the podcast today is to talk about the book that you wrote about Lanarkshire Folk Tales, which is the title of the book. It's packed with loads of great tales from across the whole of the area. Where did the inspiration come for creating that book?
Oh, Lanarkshire Folk Tales. Well, that was quite a long time ago, at least 6, maybe even 7 years ago. The director of the Scottish Storytelling Centre in Edinburgh, Donald Smith, he suggested to me that I write to the History Press and collect Lanarkshire folk tales for them, because
Mhm.
the History Press, who are based down in Stroud in England, were looking for storytellers to collect the folk tales from every county in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales for
All
their
right.
folk tales series of the whole of the country. And they wanted it in a storyteller's voice. You
Right.
know, they thought, well, you're the people out there telling stories to modern audiences. So if we get the tales of a county collected through the storyteller's voice, that's what we're looking for. So I was asked to do that, and I put it on hold for quite a while, thinking, oh, I haven't got the time ever to sit and write, and I'm not a writer. But eventually, after about 5 years of procrastination and a bit of research here and there, and also, looking after my parents as they grew elderly and sick and
Yeah.
died, it was a long, long process putting it together, but it was quite a relief to see it in print last year. It came out 21.
Yeah, and I'll often think it must be quite a satisfying thing whenever you have spent so long kind of putting together either kind of collection of stories like yours, or just a kind of more traditional novel or whatever, to finally get to that point where it is published and out there for people to see. Also, probably a bit nerve-wracking, I would imagine, to kind of see what people think of it whenever you first get a chance to see it.
Yeah, because you're so close to those stories. You've relived them and rewritten them that many times, and you're never happy with it. The You might feel quite pleased as at the time, but then you look back and you think, oh, I could tweak this, I could tweak that, and now I know a wee bit more, because
Yeah.
life keeps on going, and you keep on meeting people, historians, folk with a wee snippet of information here and there. But that, I think it's all covered because they are folk stories, which means that it doesn't mean they're made up fantasy. It means it's just been passed on from generation to generation, people to people.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, there must be a lot of work and research put into kind of putting it all together. I would imagine must have been a lot of work put in those 6 years. Must have been a kind of quite a big task.
It's such a big area. I mean, you think of all of Lanarkshire, right down to Lead Hills, and then all the way up the river, and of course into Glasgow, which was part of Lanarkshire. I explain the boundaries of the county in the introduction,
Yeah,
which I was learning as I wrote it, because I wasn't aware that it had been 1975. There'd been the change of boundary where Glasgow wasn't officially part of Lanarkshire anymore. But anywhere you go in Glasgow, the older folk still think of themselves as being part of Lanarkshire. Um, and Renfrewshire, I believe, way back was Lanarkshire, and Eastern Bartonshire. So it was just a huge county.
yeah,
And I think I made the mistake right back when I started researching. I think I thought we were the largest county, and I must have said that to the publisher at one point, because that initially they put that out in the publicity. But of course, I'd done my research by now and realised, no, we're definitely not the biggest landmass of any of the counties in Scotland, but the largest population. So we
yeah.
got that corrected swiftly.
And amongst the stories, do you have any particular favourite amongst them that stand out to you, that are kind of feel kind of touched you, that as a personal story or anything like that?
There's a Oh, I've got to give you the honest answer. There's a few. I've over the last year since it's been published, I've said to myself, oh, this I've told a story at a gathering or a night and thought, oh, that is my favorite. That's my favorite. But that's changed a few times. So last week I would have told you something different to this week. I think there's three stand out for me though. Shall I tell you who they are? Which
Yeah, of
story?
course. Yeah.
The first one I would have classed as a favourite is called The Black Clydesdale.
Hmm.
And that was a true story told to me by a woman called Charlotte Howitt. And Charlotte lived near Blackwood in the farm. Now, what was the farm? Was almost the same name as the family name, Howitt Farm, and that's on the edge of Blackwood and Carluke. And I met Charlotte at a storytelling night in Lanark, way back 2008 or 7, and she told this family story. So a real tale that came from her father and mother, and it was about Queenie, the black Clydesdale horse,
Okay.
and it was so touching. And I recorded Charlotte telling the story when I did a course in Scottish folklore, and I wanted to collect stories from farmers and people who knew about the land and the wildlife they'd seen come and go. And very sadly, Charlotte died a few years back, but her son, who is a friend, Robert Howitt, gave me permission to retell Charlotte's story in Lanarkshire Folk Tales. So that was a favourite. And again, it's a real story. It's not all myth and legend that becomes part of a folktale collection.
Yeah.
But another favourite was one called Katie Navy's Hoard. And that's literally I can see the place it's about out my window, Black Hill. And there's a viewpoint there. People in these parts will know it as Black Hill Viewpoint. And it's an archaeological site. They believe it was a Bronze Age fort and then an Iron Age fort on top of it. And all I had to go on for that story was 2 wee snippets in a collection of Scottish folklore. And there was a rhyme that had been handed down from the 18th and maybe even 19th century that said, "Tween Dillerburn and Crossford, there lies Katie Navy's hoard." And it's one of these digging for buried treasure rhymes that were really popular in the 19th century.
Yeah.
And between Dillerhill, Dillisburn and Crossford, well, there's quite a few hills, but Black Hill's the one that stood out for me. So there was a lot of invention of my own in that story based on some very old folktale gems about people having standing stones blown up on their land because of the belief that there was buried treasure in the area. So you could persuade people when they weren't in work to come in and blow up your standing stones and create stones for dike walls by saying, well, if you find the treasure, you can keep it. But we don't know if the treasure was ever found.
People might want to kind of still look for it, and after reading your book, see if they can discover it.
And do you know my other favourite story? And it's very fitting because it was by Ian Hamilton QC, who died very recently, last week or the week before. He was, I think he was in his mid to late 90s, but he had a story that was supposed to be the Hamilton story of why the Cadzow oak trees were planted, which
Right.
are near Châtellerault,
Yeah.
just outside where Hamilton Palace would have stood. And it was the Duke of Hamilton told his father and him this tale. And I was very lucky to get permission from Ian Hamilton QC to retell his family tale in this collection. But he was a very generous, very intelligent man. When I asked his permission, he said, of course, you may retell it. This is a folk story. That is for the people. That's what they're for, retelling. So he wasn't precious in ownership of his tale. And it's a really good story. People enjoy that one a lot.
Yeah, I think the book is full of some great stories, and I think the great thing about it being kind of so kind of wide in its scope in terms of places that are covered, I think there's probably something somewhere everywhere that everyone will, in that Lanarkshire will kind of relate to in some way, and kind of really kind of know, maybe either know this part of the story or have heard kind of something to do with it, or know the places that are mentioned, stuff like that in it, which I think is part of the kind of charm of kind of the folk tales and things like that, I think.
Yes, yeah, they're the folk stories. And everybody, do you know, people add to it. When I go out and I get to go into a community and share some of the stories, more comes back to you from folks' memories. That's why your first question about you pleased with this. You just want to go back and rewrite was when you find out more wee details and bit quirks of history. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Folk tales belong to the people.
And I'm guessing probably that whenever you were kind of researching the book, that you probably came across stories that hasn't made it into the book. Is that the case?
A few, yes, absolutely. Glasgow in particular had lots of ghost stories and tales of murder. And, there's only so many ghost stories and tales of murder you want in one volume. There was a couple from South Lanarkshire that I've actually reserved back from this book for the local, now what are they called? Lanark and District Archaeological Society are planning a book of Clydesdale curiosity stories. So I kept 2 cracking tales back for that book. I can't tell you when it's going to be printed, but watch this space.
Yeah.
That'll come out. So there's a couple of lovely tales for that. I made a dreadful mistake of forgetting to include Cumbernauld because it wasn't in my original old map. And I've got a really nice wee tale from Cumbernauld. But again, watch this space. That might get into print in the near future. So, and other stories that were just, something to do with the right teller or the right person tells that story. And they'll be wonderful and we'll all appreciate it. But they didn't feel right in my hands. It just wasn't part of my cultural background, or I didn't feel that I knew the area that well. So there's a few didn't make it in just because they weren't the right story for me to tell.
Yeah, one of my favourites in the collection is the one about the Bartram the Giant of Shotts.
Oh yes,
I'm a Salisbury boy myself, so it's kind of close to where I grew up, and I know Kate Swell that's mentioned in it very well. And I grew up kind of hearing sort of clips of stories about a giant and things like that whenever I was little. But I'd never kind of really heard like kind of a sort of full tale, like I feel like you've got in your book. So it was kind of really interesting for me to kind of hear more about that story. There's an area of Salisbury that's got a big hill, and there's a kind of smaller mountain next to it, and that's where I'd kind of heard about it before, because the story that I was told was that was supposed to be the giant buried underneath the ground, and that's why the hill was there, and the mound was supposed to be his head, which is without wanting to kind of give too many spoilers, is how he ends up in your story as well. So I think really interesting reading that one, because it kind of had that kind of personal kind of part to me, It was good.
Your connection, storytelling's about connection, isn't it? And local tales connect us all. Did you know about the well, Kate? Now I know that's still there, and there's a wee memorial at Katie's Well. But did you know about the water was meant to be particularly good for people's pet fish?
No,
It healed.
no, I hadn't heard that before. I mean, I grew up in Cateswell, and depending on who you spoke to at the time, whether they told you whether the water was good or bad out of Cateswell. I remember as a child kind of visiting Cateswell quite a few times, and it was always kind of part of the kind of journey was to kind of stop there and fill your water bottle and things like that sort of stuff if you were on your bike and things. And so it was interesting kind of hearing it put into a kind of proper tale, and having hearing a bit of kind of history behind the well and things like that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of hear that part of it too.
I think so. I would have had various places to research. Online's obviously the quickest and the easiest, and there's a great local folktale history online research base, and that's what's it called? Doorstep History. Now I don't know if it's still there, but that was run by Jennifer McFadden, had written up her interest in folklore. So that's where I first learned about the Giant of Shotts. And when you're putting a folktale book collection together, you're looking for wizards and fairies and giants and kelpies and brunies. And so a giant, I was like, well, I have to do more research on this. And it looks like he, I believe he existed, Bertram de Schotts, and he would have been 6 foot something, which would have been tall for the day.
Yeah.
He was a highwayman, robbing from the rich to give to the poor, and he's supposed to have given his name when he laughed up in the face of de Muirhead, who was, about to dispatch poor Bertram.
Yeah.
And there's an area of land was called Lord Hope, Loch Hope. And
Yeah.
we're using Scots words, Loch, Lauch. Loch Hope was the area of land given to de Muirhead for dispatching the highwayman. And I did check on maps. There was definitely a Loch Hope and a Lord Hope mentioned in the place names.
Yeah.
So there's some definite genuine history wrapped up in folk legend with that one, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting to kind of see those words kind of connect with things that you know, like that. And then there's a Loch Hope Street in Chapel Hall, which is fairly close to Salisbury and things like that. So there might be kind of some kind of connection with that kind of area and things like that as well. So
yes,
yeah, it was a fascinating read for me. And another one that the nearby stories to that one is the Maggie Ramsay, the Witch of Old Airdrie one, which has been the focus of one of the projects you've been doing with Airdrie Library quite recently. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story first of all?
Yes, Maggie Ramsay, the Witch of the Old North Burn. I had just 2 very good sources for that story, which had been printed as serial stories in the local newspaper in the 1940s, and then William Erskine, whose work it was, the writer, they were put into a collection of the Book of Airdrie, and so there were other snippets about Maggie Ramsay online, slightly different variations of who she was, but the woods where I meet just close to the library are called the Maggie Ramsay Woods, and that's where the librarians, Andrew Feeney and Judy Maguire, for the Scotland's Year of Storytelling 2022, they asked me to come in and run some heritage storytelling walks through the Maggie Ramsay Woods. And I think we're up to 5 now. And the very last one is, I think it's next week. I think we have our last Maggie Ramsay walk next week. And that has been an absolute joy, taking the folk tale and the story back into the landscape where it was said to have happened. And we've had great turnouts each time, apart from the last one, which was a shame because the weather had been rotten, and then the day of the storytelling it was baking hot, which was a bit unusual for October. Judy and I ended up with our jackets off. It was so warm. So yes, I would say to people, if they want to book up for the last one, it's worth coming, because the story changes ever so slightly each time, because Maggie Ramsay was reputed to have been a woman whose husband was press-ganged into the Navy, leaving her to fend for herself. And the only way she knew to make a living was to harvest some of the plants along the old North Burn and make lotions and potions. And she would have had some herbal medicine knowledge and made up cures, but it was mostly she was making posies to go under your pillow at night so you would dream of your true love. And she was a spey wife, I think is one description. She could read palms and tea leaves. And when we take this walk out in the story along the North Burn, of course, as the seasons have changed, so have the plants that grow. And there's just a massive selection of wild plants still growing there. And I look up each time we take the walk, I consult my herbal books and find out the folklore about the plants that are growing. So a couple of people have come on every walk, and they're delighted because the information changes as the season develops and the plants grow. So also I tell the main story of Maggie Ramsay, but I can always squeeze in some little extra tales to make sure it's fresh every different walk. But Maggie Ramsay, fascinating. It's tied together with a storm that was meant to have happened in 1780. And there's a story from East Kilbride in the book, which also refers to this dreadful storm that was meant to have raged for a week across parts of central Scotland. And 1780, that's only 40 years after the Witchcraft Act had been repealed in Scotland. So people, it's still very much in the folks' minds that the devil's out there causing any harm or disasters like storms or your crops failing. And during the witchcraft trials and the hunts of Scotland, the church had the firm belief that the devil was rampant in the land and that he could coerce people into helping him. So those ideas were still around, and that's why Maggie Ramsay, with her tea leaf reading and her palm reading and her herbal cures, was likened to being a witch. And then people, the stories, the wonderful folk stories have grown up around the area since her time, saying that she cursed the North Burn and that anybody that misused the land or the waters would meet a dreadful end. And so for a couple of 100 years, those stories have grown and developed. And, you know, if every time we did the walk, somebody would add their own little bit of local history. One woman said her father said when he was a young man, he would skip out after tea and he would come to the brae there, the Maggie Ramsay brae, or the area was known as Fiddle Naked. So that goes back before Maggie's day, that it was likened to be a place where witches gathered, and that he would hide his tobacco on the hillside and he would go out for a smoke after his dinner, unbeknown to his parents. So yeah, I've gathered lovely tales from the folk who've come to join the walks along the way.
Yeah, and I like you were saying that's part of the fantastic thing with stories, because they've always having a kind of group of people like that hearing the story. There are people who can maybe add little bits to it and things like that as you go along as well, which is fantastic. I think by the time we put this podcast out, the last story walk will have actually been already, but hopefully everyone who's been on them has enjoyed them thoroughly, and it's been a great experience for everyone that's been on it. And I've really enjoyed it. Is it something that you've enjoyed taking part in, and kind of having the kind of challenge of different groups coming along each time and kind of telling the story to different age groups, different kind of people and things like that?
Yes, because it has been mixed age groups. So when you get the different ages together, you know, we get the terminology, it's intergenerational, and real magic happens when you've got a grandparent sharing with the young one and everybody in between. Everybody, it becomes a community event that really, like, it's the people's arts. You know, it's for the people, it's by the people, and you share it amongst the people. So it's a good community spirit. I've loved it. I've learned so much from folk who come along, and you know, been a slightly nervous, how do I keep this fresh and alive each time? I've not had to, you know, I've worried unnecessarily, because each time you go along the landscape, the trees have gone through their 6-month cycle. So we've seen the spring buds turn into the full harvest of the summer and the autumn, and now the leaves are fading and all the fungi are up and the plants have all changed. So it's been really special to do this. I feel deeply honoured to have been asked, and I've learned an awful lot from taking the same story walk to the same place for 6 months. It's been an experience I've loved.
And certainly from whenever I've spoken to Judy and Drew about it, it does seem as if the people who have been on the walks have really got a lot out of it as well, and really enjoyed it from the feedback that they've received as well, which is fantastic. And the very first one, I think, was a bit of a special one as well, because am I right in thinking there was a accompanying music to go along with that one as well?
Yes, the very first one, I had applied to the Village Storytelling Festival. Now, the Village are in Glasgow, in Pollock Shores, I mix those two up. Anyway, it's a storytelling centre in Glasgow. They had put out a tender for people to take part in their festival, and one of them was a digital commission. And a young filmmaker I knew who was keen to record me telling a story with a musician I applied for the funding and we got it. So we combined that with the first Maggie Ramsey walk, and a wonderful violinist, Shannon Stevenson, came along and played violin in the landscape in the fiddle naked field next to a burnt out car. You couldn't make it up. And she played some beautiful pieces of Scottish folk music on fiddle alongside, she played the devil's part in the Maggie Ramsey story. Everything there but the naked dancers. And so that was an added treat. And the film was made. And then I actually went on, rather than just get the wee digital commission, to get one of the main pieces for the festival. And I put that on. It was called Nefarious Practices. So it was a film and a live performance at the CCA in Glasgow. And Nefarious Practices, the title for my show, came from Maggie Ramsey's stories. The church had served a censure on Maggie Ramsey at one point for her tea leaf reading and telling people their fortunes, and had told her that she had to cease her nefarious practices. So that had come from the actual story. Yes, and I got to take part in July in the last night of the storytelling festival. Yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic, and that, I believe what was by the time this goes out as well, I think the event's already happened, but there's also going to be a showing of the film as well, in Airdrie Library, which hopefully people have managed to come along to and see as well, and either kind of experience that first walk for them for the first time, or also after they have been on the walk, they can kind of come and see the film they were part of, which is fantastic.
Yes, and I hope to come along to that too.
Yeah.
And the film's shot in black and white, so it's very atmospheric.
Yeah.
So you almost get that you were in a different day and age when Maggie was there, walking the burn, picking herbs.
Fantastic. And you gave us a little bit of kind of insight earlier into this one, but I was going to ask you, is there any kind of plans as a sort of follow-up to Lanarkshire Folk Tales, like a kind of a sort of new set of tales that might have kind of came to light, or was kind of putting that collection together enough of research for you? You had to know though that you've got a couple of things kind of in the pipeline with a few of the tales that didn't quite make it into it though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a good story from South Lanarkshire about the building of Craignethan Castle, an old ballad which was about the witch, supposed to be, not a witch, what is she exactly? The spirit of Tinto Hill. So there's a couple of stories that are going into the Archaeological Society's book when that comes out. A wee cracking tale, like I say, from Castle Carey, Cumbernauld, might make it into a reprint of Lanarkshire Folk Tales when it comes out.
Okay.
But as I say, the rest of the tales that didn't make it in, I think there was enough to make up a spooky collection of ghost stories. So I've not talked to any publishers about that yet, but you never know. I do have a file full of notes on the ones that didn't make it in. I don't think I've enough for another volume like Lanarkshire Folk Tales though, but you never know. Give it a few years, Chris, and if we keep doing heritage walks and storytelling where the public can come and share their own tales, that book might happen yet.
Yeah, fantastic. And it would be fantastic to see more of the kind of folk tales of Lanarkshire kind of put together like that and accessible. And I was thinking about it earlier when we were talking about how they pass down generations, and I think your book is something that could be quite interesting for people to experience way in the future, whenever they can look back and they'll be able to kind of see the stories as they are, and kind of maybe add parts to the stories as themselves and things like that. It's a wonderful way how folk tales work and how they kind of grow arms and legs a little bit as time passes and things. So you never know, it could kind of be an interesting kind of thing for people in the future to kind of come across and kind of experience those tales for the first time and things like that as well. Do you have any exciting plans for the future, the next kind of wee while as well? Have you got anything happening that'd be kind of interesting for any of the listeners to kind of find out about?
Well, we've got Book Week Scotland coming up. I think I am in some local schools and cafes, library cafes. But I think the only real exciting thing I've got coming up is a new collection of folk tales, but for children, will be coming out next spring. With the same publisher, the History Press. I sat during the lockdown, and every time I walked past toddlers out for walks with their parents, I saw fear in the poor wee ones' eyes. They hadn't met people. Everybody was wearing masks. And I thought, oh, we're going to need a lot of healing laughter and help for the children coming out of this pandemic situation. So I collected my very favourite funny folk tales that have a good laugh involved in them, and the publisher we've put that together, and that'll come out next spring. Funny folk tales for children. So, and I mean, it says for children, but again, it's intergenerational.
Yeah, of course.
I think parents and grandparents should be getting those books and enjoying them just as much, because some of the folk tales are just classically hilarious stories that work for every age. The child within all of us, no matter what age you are, likes a good laugh.
Definitely.
So that's my bit of news for the future that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic, and I'm sure anyone who has adults who have read Lanarkshire Folk Tales will definitely enjoy that too. So it kind of add into the kind of collection of folk tales that are out there and things. But that's all my questions that I've got for you, Alison. Thank you very much for coming and being part of our Book Week Scotland podcast, and it's been great to hear a little bit more about some of the folk tales in your book, and also the kind of project that you've been running with the Airdrie Library over the course of the last few months and things like that. It's been a great chance to kind of hear a little bit more about that, and hear a little bit more of the background on some of the stories from your book as well. So thank you for coming and speaking to me.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking. And, you know, all the budding folklorists out there, keep it up. This is the connection that keeps us all learning together. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed hearing directly from Alison all about her book Lanarkshire Folk Tales, and also finding out a little bit more about the project she's been doing with Airdrie Library, Folk Tales of Lanarkshire. There is a little bit of a follow-up to that. The story walks have finished at the moment, but there are some follow-up workshops happening as well, which are some creative writing, illustration workshops, and some tile painting workshops as well. So there's more information about that to come. Do check out our website for more details about that if it's something you think you might be interested in. It would be definitely worth getting involved in. And the other big event that we've got to tell you a little bit more about is the Murder in the Museum. There's a few tickets left for it, so do get in quickly if you do fancy it. It has been selling well, and there is only a few tickets left if you want to get along to that event. And there is on the website you can sign up and book the tickets, or you can also add to our official playlist for the event, which is 80s themed, because the event does have an 80s theme. It is called Revenge of the Leg Warmers, and you can submit a song on there to create a part of our playlist, which is promoting Playlists for Life as well. So that's all for now for us, guys. If you have enjoyed this podcast, do leave us a little bit of feedback using hashtag FLB podcast on Twitter, or by dropping us an email at librarypodcast@northland.gov.uk, and we will see you all again soon. Bye for now. Bye.